Thank you so much for allowing me the privilege of standing here in your presence. I feel like the woman who spoke earlier that I'm really the least of these. In all honesty, I never chose this path. It chose me. So I have my tissues, and I'm going to try to get through this as best I can. I never know what will bother me, but anyway. One thing that I really like to do when I speak to people is I like to put a face on the military. Too often in our culture, it's easy for us to just perceive the soldier and not the human. We don't think that they were ever a child or that their mother had to change their diapers Lord knows how many times and you know, sat up with them when they had fevers and took them to the hospital, those things. We don't think about that when we think of a warrior because we see that person accomplished. And so it's easy for us as Americans to dismiss, just casually dismiss, and I was guilty of it too, when we hear on the news that 4 U.S. soldiers were killed last night. And we say, oh, that's awful. And then we just move on. And so what I'm trying to do is bring a face to the soldiers as well as inform this nation of what is happening in our military. So I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about my son, Aaron. We raised him on a small farm in West Tennessee, in a very small town, and he was like most young boys. He had a fearless but tender heart. And we laugh as a family when we tell the story that he was heartbroken when his younger sister, who's in the audience today, 2 years his junior, told him the truth one morning about the tooth fairy, excuse me. And right here, I'd like to ask my daughters to stand, Tara and Anna. Please stand. And I'd like to say that Anna, here in front, was 12 years younger than Aaron, so she was his little sister, and he was her hero. And it's been a tremendous loss, and I'd like to recognize that. And then about Tara, right over here, I'd like to say that he was her best friend, and she was his. They grew up, like I said, only 21 months apart. So there was a great camaraderie. They always had each other. And the loss has been terrific for these girls. Aaron gave his life to Christ as a very young boy. And because of that, he had this ability to understand that he'd been created for a purpose, for something greater than himself. And, you know, he had this keen ability to see this world in black and white. And one thing that I was most proud about him was that he was never afraid to recognize evil or to call it out. By his 8th birthday, he would start telling anybody that would listen that he was going to be a Navy SEAL. And you can see by the image that it usually got kind of a grin and a chuckle and a pat on the back, you know, that Aaron somehow knew that he was. He never gave up on that dream, and he overcame unimaginable odds to achieve it. His BUDS class, Class 248, BUDS stands for Basic Underwater Demolition / SEAL, began with around 150 men. And by the time Hell Week was over, in the first phase, there were only 20 left standing, and Aaron was one of them. He accomplished all of this. If there's anybody who knows anything about orthopedics, he accomplished all of this with no ACL in his left knee. The Navy never knew that, because if he had told them, they wouldn't have let him in the program. Anyone who knows anything about the now famous SEAL Team 6 will tell you that only the very best of the very best make it into that unit. And Aaron earned a spot among that elite group of the most highly esteemed warriors in our nation, even while going blind in his right eye, forcing him to shift to his left eye and left-handed, which is, again, another feat. And I want to tell you, I don't tell you that to brag on Aaron. I tell you that to help you understand that God had a calling on Aaron's life, and he had uniquely equipped him for every challenge that he was going to put in his path. And Aaron was incredibly humbled by that thought. We talked about it many times. As a matter of fact, one story I like to tell is Aaron had such a passion for Christ through his life that I used to always think that God was telling me that Aaron was going to be a missionary. One day after he had been a SEAL for many years, we were having a late night talk, and I said, you know, son, I'm just confused because I know God has clearly called you to do this, but I always thought he was saying that you were going to be a missionary. And he said, well, Mom, maybe you just misunderstood him, and he said a mercenary. He had that sort of wit about him. I also would like to tell you that his father and I never tried to hold him back, nor would we if we could do it again. We were always proud of the choices he made. You see, this family understands that sometimes war is necessary. And Aaron counted it a great honor to take his place in history among the men and women who have been and are still willing to lay down their lives for the preservation of this great republic. And he never took for granted the fact that he had been blessed enough to have been born in the United States of America, the land of the free. So Aaron's deployments came and went. We learned to cherish any moments that God gave us together as a family. We played hard, we laughed hard, and we loved deeply, always with that ominous threat hanging over our heads that one day all of it could change. It's funny, though. Out of all of his deployments, I feared this one the least. We visited Aaron and his wife in mid-June to celebrate the birth of their second child, Chamberlain, who was only 3 weeks old when her daddy left for his final deployment. Their firstborn, Reagan, was almost 2. I'll never forget hugging my boy goodbye. That final time, and our last words were, I love you. I'm so proud of you. And I'll see you in November. August 6th, 7:30 in the morning, my phone rang and woke me up. I answered it. It was my husband. His voice was quivering, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. He was working over 3,500 miles away from home. He said, Karen, I have something to tell you, and I don't want to. He went on to tell me that a chopper had been shot down in the Wardak province of Afghanistan, and that 30 Americans were dead. And that as the reports had come in through the early hours of the morning, the details began to sound more and more like it could involve a team like Aaron's. As soon as we hung up, I began making calls frantically, reporting back to Billy between every call. He called our oldest daughter and asked her to come to the house when we got off the phone, just in case. I kept thinking, Aaron, please, just call me and tell me you're okay. Surely you know how frightened we are. Tara said, Mom, with everything that's just happened last night, I'm sure they're too busy for anybody to make calls home right now. And that made sense. But there was just this gnawing inside me, and somehow I knew that this wasn't going to end well. Only 1 hour had passed from my husband's first phone call that morning until I heard the 10 words that forever changed my life, as well as the lives of my entire family. Aaron was on the helicopter, and there were no survivors. There are really no words to adequately describe how surreal a moment like that is. And I'll tell you without shame that not a day has passed where I haven't had at least a moment where I felt like I can't stand one more minute of this gripping, crushing pain. But I only say that to also tell you that in those moments, somehow God refreshes my broken heart. And he reassures me that just as he had a plan and a purpose for Aaron's life, he has one for mine. And that gives me the strength to keep going. And this, speaking to wonderful patriots like you, at least for this season in my life, is how God has chosen to use me. Because in my weakness, he has been made strong. So please understand that since this platform came at a great price to me, I bear an even greater responsibility to speak the truth from it. Truth that's difficult to share and maybe difficult to hear. Before Aaron's death, my husband and I, Billy, we thought we understood the severity of the economic and structural issues that we faced as a nation under our current president, who, as Victoria said, will go unnamed. But after his death, we began searching for answers. And as we searched, we became tragically aware that perhaps the cruelest, most deceitful acts of this administration had been perpetrated against the very ones fighting to defend it. Amen. I want to tell you, some of you may have seen our story on Fox News, I don't know, so bear with me if I'm redundant. But within 24 hours of this administration announcing that it was SEAL Team 6 who took out Osama bin Laden, my son called me and said, "Mom, wipe your social media clean." I mean all of it. Of any reference to me, any reference to any of my buddies, because there is chatter and our lives are in danger, and yours is too. 90 some odd days later, SEAL Team 6 took the greatest loss in its history, actually the history of Naval Special Warfare. My son was dead. We found out some treacherous things as we began searching for those answers. We found out that on the night that Aaron and 29 other brave American warriors were shot out of the sky, they were operating in an incredibly hostile area, which according to our military had been cleared on 7 prior occasions, turned back over to the Afghanis, who surrendered it to the enemy. The mission that night was so dangerous that it had to be approved by leaders outside of the theater, but even then, the following took place. We learned that the most elite warriors in our nation's history, members of SEAL Team 6, were flown into battle that night on the CH-47D Chinook that was built in the early 1960s, last retrofitted in the early 80s. We also discovered that due to this president's negligent, if not criminal, rules of engagement, no pre-assault fire paved the way that night for that school bus, if you will, to make its slow contemplated runway landing in this hostile, pitch-black territory, even though it was making its entrance in the midst of a 3.5-hour firefight, a firefight which, according, again, to military records, had the entire valley on a heightened state of alert. But no pre-assault fire. Why? Because pre-assault fire could be perceived as aggressive and disrupt our efforts to win the hearts and minds of our enemy. Again, due to this president's rules of engagement, our air support above, the most impressive the world has ever known, could not return fire on the men who launched the RPGs that killed 30 Americans because we couldn't be certain that there were not friendlies inside the building they stood on top of. But even more disturbing, we learned that the Afghan National Army, the Afghan National Police, and the Afghan Security Ministry are and have been involved in the planning of every single mission that our operators perform in Afghanistan. Yes, the same organizations which are responsible for every green on blue attack, murder that's taken place in Afghanistan. Yet our strategy had not changed until just about 2 weeks ago when the U.S. military finally suspended most joint field operations with Afghan forces. But we still involve the Afghans in our planning as trusted allies, even though this has proven deadly for our warriors time and time again. And to my knowledge, this administration refuses to express any outrage over these unnecessary deaths. However, at the first hint of an error on our side, our president is zealous to apologize for our military and quick to promise that those responsible will be held accountable. This apology always comes prior to the unfolding of any of the actual facts. Can you imagine how demoralizing this is to the men and women who are fighting for us? This leads me to believe that the events surrounding my son's death and so many other deaths are the result of an ideology and a strategy put forth by our president and this administration. And by the way, are you aware that 70% of the deaths in the 10 years of war in Afghanistan have taken place in the past 3.5 years under this president? But even more staggering are the numbers on the wounded in action. Under 7 years of President Bush, 2,696 service members were wounded in action. Under President Obama, in 3 short years, this data is only good through February of 2012, it's a staggering 12,626. And I believe that that number is over 14,000 now. The Commander-in-Chief, in case you weren't aware, because I wasn't, is responsible for the rules of engagement. His failure to allow our warriors to engage a savage enemy in an effective way has led to the needless deaths of this country's most precious treasure, the blood of our children, our fathers, our husbands, our wives, our daughters, our sisters, our brothers. And it is not acceptable. Time will not allow me to properly address all that's happened in these past 2.5 weeks with the slaying of Ambassador Stevens, the murder of countless U.S. and NATO troops, the insider attacks on our secured bases, the burning and desecration of our American flag across 21 countries. But please allow me, if you will, to express my outrage over this administration's initial apology and subsequent blame game, insisting that all of this violence was brought on by a ridiculous 14-minute video. And may I ask you, what country are we living in when the chairman of our Joint Chiefs of Staff calls a private citizen and urges them to forfeit their First Amendment rights so that the jihadists won't attack our soldiers in Afghanistan? Basically, he's saying, if you don't stop, you're responsible for the deaths of our soldiers. Really? Really? Have we honestly reached a point of such political correctness that we're willing to blame the actions of radical Islamists on a simple man from Florida or a simple video? And by the way, I'm going to say a name, General Dempsey, with all due respect. If you will allow our soldiers the right to fight and defend themselves, we will not be forced to bow to terrorists. Our military is more than capable of defending themselves if we allow them. They are Americans. Let them fight or bring them home. That they cannot defeat us by destroying our tanks, but they believe that they can destroy us by defeating our will, and I fear they are right. What we're witnessing today has been boiling under the surface for a long, long time. When America is perceived by the world to be strong, there is peace, period. When we're perceived as weak, there is chaos. My son and all the others who have died and spent every part of themselves for this country, they gave up so much of the life the rest of us enjoy. Aaron and the 29 other great American warriors who died with him persevered through unimaginable odds to earn the privilege of stepping on to that 1960s something helicopter that night. The least their president could have done is offered them every opportunity to succeed and come home to those that love them and to those that they loved. Our warriors deserve to be defended. They deserve the right to fight for their life with rules of engagement which favor them rather than their enemy. They deserve proper equipment and support, and they certainly deserve a commander-in-chief who has their backs, not one who's in when things go well and wants to take the credit for when SEAL Team 6 takes bin Laden out, but then deserts them with apologies when something goes wrong. So you're probably asking yourself right now, what can I do? I'm asked that all the time, and I understand, honestly I do, because I remember watching Glenn Beck when he was still on Fox, and wanting to throw my shoe at the television and scream, "Tell me what to do!" You know, because he would tell us these unthinkable truths about what was going on in our government, and I just wanted him to lead me, to guide me, to give me some sort of plan of action. But here's what God has shown me. And I believe we can find the answer in Hebrews chapter 11, because in that I found that we each individually need to look to God and ask Him what our role should be in the preservation and restoration of this republic. All of us won't be called to the same action because we're unique and we're individually gifted. Think about Daniel, Moses, Noah, Abraham, Esther, and yes, even Aaron Vaughn. What do they have in common? They were all called upon in very unique and different ways. But they all answered the call. They stepped out in faith, and they understood that they were never meant to be sheep to anyone other than the true shepherd. This gave them the courage, the focus, the fearlessness, and the strength to impact their world in the time that they lived with the unique gifts that they had been given. And their choices changed history. Today, I challenge you to do the same. There are many incredible organizations that you can support or become active in, such as the sponsors of this incredible event that we've been blessed enough to be part of today. Or maybe God's been calling you to do something on your own. Only you know that. Maybe your role is simply sharing information about current events and issues with your circle of influence so that those around you are made aware of what's happening to the America that we love. The true answer lies in your willingness to allow God to show you what He wants you to do. But let me warn you, it might not be fun. While Hebrews 11 tells us that the heroes of the faith overthrew kingdoms, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and ruled with justice, it also tells us that some were jeered at, chained in prisons, tortured, and even stoned. It takes fortitude to stand against oppression. And friends, we, the people of the United States of America, are being oppressed. But we can do something about that. We, the people, have power to change the course of this nation. And let me just give you a little short story, and then I'll finish up. On September 11th, 2001, our government was helpless to intercept or do one single thing about 4 attacks that took place on our soil. But on Flight 93, there are a group of citizens who stood up, who answered the call, and they changed history. Because what we know now is that that plane was headed to the center of our country. I want to finish just by expressing my heartfelt gratitude, because when I look at your faces of true patriots who love and treasure this great republic, it assures me that my son did not die in vain. He would be proud that you've assembled yourselves here today for such a time as this, a time that is so pivotal in our country's history. So thank you, and may God bless America.